Welcome to session 5 of our study on the books of Joshua and Judges. In this session, we're going to read chapters 13 through 19, beginning the book of apportionment. The promised land has been conquered by Joshua and the Israelites, and what remains is to divide the spoils, determine which tribe is to be given which territory. But before all that division, we begin with a prayer. O God, our Father, open our eyes and enlighten our minds as we study your word. So grant that our minds may know your truth and our hearts may feel your love, and then confirm and strengthen our wills that we may go out to live what we have learned through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Chapter 13 begins a new direction in the book of Joshua. We move from invasion and conquest to division and settlement of the land. The last 12 chapters of Joshua are sometimes called the book of apportionment. A major turning point is signaled by a renewed command of Yahweh, just as the command of the Lord in chapter 1, verses 2 through 9, initiated the direction of the remainder of the first half of Joshua. The directive of chapter 13, verse 1 through 7, launches chapters 14 through 21. The notice of Joshua's advanced age that we will read in chapter 13 leads one to expect a farewell situation in which the aged leader will deliver final words of advice before his death. And the use of this language again in chapter 23 introduces just such a scenario. But here we discover that before a farewell, the task of dividing the land must be completed. But even before the division gets underway, there are two detours. First, the land that remains, and second, the territory of the eastern tribes. We begin chapter 13, verse 1 through 7. Now Joshua was old and advanced in years, and the Lord said to him, You are old and advanced in years, and very much of the land still remains to be possessed. This is the land that still remains, all the regions of the Philistines, all those of the Gershurites, from Shehor, which is near Egypt, northward to the boundary of Ekron. It is reckoned as Canaanite. There are 5 rulers of the Philistines, those of Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron, and those of Evim in the south, all the land of the Canaanites and the Merah that belongs to Sidonians, to Aphek, to the boundary of the Amorites, and the land of the Gebalites, and all Lebanon, toward the east from Baalgad, below Mount Hermon, to Leub Hamath, all the inhabitants of the hill country, from Lebanon to Mesperath Maim, even to the Sidonians. I will myself drive them out from before the Israelites, only allot the land to Israel for an inheritance, as I have commanded you. Now therefore divide this land for an inheritance to the 9 tribes and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Verses 1 through 7 follow a conceptual pattern already introduced by chapter 12, which gives us the theological infrastructure. In this pattern, static geographic data is converted into active salvation history, celebrating Yahweh's faithful gift of the land. This theme of land, which yet remains to be granted, would have been particularly powerful in the periods of exile and post-exile, when possession of the full extent of the land of promise was only a memory and a hope. So odd bits of traditional geographic data were transformed into claims on the future. In this context, these verses would call readers to faithful obedience, even while they had to wait for complete possession of that promise. Divide up what you have now and wait in faith for what remains, they're told. The repetition of line 1a, in which it says Joshua was old and advanced in years in the first verse of chapter 23, may be evidence that the division of the land was inserted into the Deuteronomic history version of Joshua at a later date. Dozeman, on the other hand, suggests that it was the Deuteronomistic overlay that was added to the original. The total conquest of the land was affirmed in chapter 11, 21 through 23 that we read last week. We see that again in chapter 21, verses 43 and 45, and chapter 24, verse 13. Yet verses 1 through 6 of chapter 13, we just now read, countered that the land was only partially conquered. We see the same claim that the land was only partly conquered again in chapter 23, indicating that we have two different authors who are not in full agreement. It was, of course, chapter 13 and 23, the ones claiming Joshua was getting old, where the claim lies that the land was not yet all conquered. So this is one more reason to think these two segments were written by the same author. Let's go on to verse 8, chapter 13. With the other half-tribe of Manasseh, the Reubenites and the Gadites received their inheritance, which Moses gave them beyond the Jordan eastward, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave them, from Ar, which is on the edge of the Wadi Aran, and the town that is in the middle of the valley, and all the tableland from Medeba as far as Dibon, and all of the cities of King Sihon of the Amorites who reigned in Heshbon as far as the boundary of the Ammonites, and Gilead, and the region of Geshurites and the Maccathites, and all Mount Hermon, all of Bashan to Salakah, all the kingdom of Og and Bashan, who reigned in Ashtaroth in Edrei. He alone was left of the survivors of Rephaim. These Moses had defeated and driven out. Yet the Israelites did not drive out the Geshurites or the Maccathites, but Geshur and Maccah live within Israel to this day. As we have seen earlier, the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh settled east of the Jordan. The more likely historical scenario is not that the Israelites settled east of the Jordan in the original conquest, but that they migrated there by stages later on in search of land. Let's go on to verse 14. To the tribe of Levi alone Moses gave no inheritance. The offerings by fire to the Lord God of Israel are their inheritance, as he said to them. A substantial part of these sacrifices, what we call the offerings by fire, was not burnt and thus available to the Levites for food. This verse reiterated at the end of the chapter probably reflects a Deuteronomistic background in which the cult has been centralized in Jerusalem. Let's go on to verse 15 through 23 that talk about the territory of Reuben. Moses gave an inheritance to the tribe of the Reubenites according to their families. Their territory was from Ar, which is on the edge of the Wadi Aran, and the town that is in the middle of the valley, and all the tableland by Medeba with Heshbon, and all its towns are in the tableland, Dibon and Bamuth Baal and Beth Baalman, and Jahaz and Kedmoth and Mizpath and Kirahathim and Sibmah and Zerahashar on the hill of the valley, and Bethpur and the slopes of Pisgath and Beth Jishmuth that is in the towns of the tableland, and all the kingdom of King Shalon of the Amorites who reigned in Heshbon, whom Moses defeated with the leaders of Midian, Evi and Rechem and Zur and Hur and Reba, as princes of Shion who lived in the land. Along with the rest of those they put to death. The Israelites also put to the sword Balham, son of Bor, who practiced divination. The border of the Reubenites was the Jordan and its banks, and this was the inheritance of the Reubenites according to their families with their towns and villages. So the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh and their territories east of the Jordan were mentioned in chapter 1, in chapter 4 at the border crossing, and again in chapter 12. They will appear again in chapter 22 prior to Joshua's farewell. This preoccupation was more ideological than practical. By the time this was written, much of this territory had been lost for generations. Reuben's territory north of Arnon had been Moabite since the mid-9th century. The territory of Reuben is missing entirely from David's census in 2 Samuel. Gilead was a Syrian province after 732 BCE. So let's read verses 24 through 28 in the territory given to Gad. Moses gave an inheritance also to the tribe of the Gadites according to their families. Their territory was Jazer and all the towns of Gilead, and half the land of the Ammonites to Aor, which is Rabbah, and from Heshbon to Ramoth Mizpah, and Betonimah, and from Mahayim to the territory of Debir, and the valley Beth Haram, Beth Nirmah, Succoth, Zaphon, the rest of the kingdom of King Sihon of Heshbon, the Jordan and its banks, as far as the lower end of the Sea of Shinnereth, eastward beyond the Jordan. This is the inheritance of the Gadites according to their families, with their towns and villages. So Gad's territory consists of 2 lines of extent and a city list supplemented by more generalized references. We go into verse 29 and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Moses gave an inheritance to the half-tribe of Manasseh. It was allotted to the half-tribe of the Massonites, according to their families. Their territory extended from Manaheim through all of Bashan, the whole kingdom of King Og of Bashan, and all the settlements of Jair, which are in Bashan, 60 towns, and half of Gilead, and Ashtaroth and Edrei, the towns of the kingdom of Og in Bashan. These were allotted to the people of Mashar, son of Manasseh, according to their families, for half the Masharites. These are the inheritance that Moses distributed in the plains of Moab, beyond the Jordan, east of Jericho. But to the tribe of Levi, Moses gave no inheritance, the Lord God of Israel in their inheritance, as he had said to them. The 12 tribes of Israel correspond to the 12 sons of Jacob in Genesis, with the exception of Joseph, who has 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, each of whom was to be given his own territory. The priest came from the tribe of Levi, which was given no specific territory, as we saw in verse 14 and again in verse 32. In chapter 14, we seem ready to begin the distribution of the territory west of the Jordan, that is in Canaan. But we actually begin with a couple more digressions. We're going to read all of chapter 14, but only pieces of the final 5 chapters in this session. These are the inheritances that the Israelites received in the land of Canaan, which the priest Eleazar and Joshua son of Nun and the heads of the families of the tribes of the Israelites distributed to them. Their inheritance was by lot, as the Lord commanded Moses, for the 9 1/2 tribes. For Moses had given an inheritance to the 2 1/2 tribes beyond the Jordan. But to the Levites he gave no inheritance among them. For the people of Joseph were 2 tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim, and no portion was given to the Levites in the land, but only towns to live in, with their pasture lands for their flocks and herds. The Israelites did as the Lord had commanded Moses. They allotted the land. Then the people of Judah came to Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kezarite, said to him, "You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, in Kadesh Barnea, concerning you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought him an honest report. But my companions who went up with me made the heart of the people melt. Yet I wholeheartedly followed the Lord my God. And Moses swore on that day, saying, Surely the land on which your foot has trodden shall be an inheritance for you and your children forever, because you have wholeheartedly followed the Lord my God. And now, as you see, the Lord has kept me alive, as he said, these 45 years since that time that the Lord spoke this word to Moses, while Israel was journeying through the wilderness. And here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as I was on the day that Moses sent me. My strength now is as my strength was then, for war and for going and coming. So now give me this hill country of which the Lord spoke on that day. For you heard on that day how Achaim were there, and with with great fortified cities. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I will drive them out, as the Lord said. Then Joshua blessed him and gave Hebron to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, for an inheritance. So Hebron became the inheritance of Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, to this day, because he wholeheartedly followed the Lord, the God of Israel. Now the name of Hebron formerly was Kiriath Arba. Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim, and the land had rest from war. In session 2 of this study, you may remember we read of Moses sending spies into the land of Canaan in the book of Numbers. 10 of the spies came back claiming that the land was filled with giants, impossible to conquer. But 2 returned saying that Israel was capable of conquering the land. One of those was Joshua, the other was Caleb. The focus in this section is moving toward the importance of the obedience of the whole nation. We also see a pattern here. First, a confrontation, next a statement of a case and a request to grant land, and usually a conclusion with a summary of the results. The stories are intended to justify land tenure by pointing back to an endowment by an authorized figure to an ancestor. They also help build group identity around the ancestor. This land grant narrative provides an etiology or a causation for why Caleb's descendants control Hebron, for example. The structure is confrontation, and you see in the table we have several places here, 14:6a, 17, and some places in 21. And then there's a case and the request. There's a flashback to Moses sometimes. There's the land grant, a reference to Yahweh's command at times, and finally a summary of the results. The Caleb story reflects theological themes common to Joshua. Like Caleb, Israel's ancestors followed Yahweh's plan obediently and faithfully and thus gained title to the land. Even if now the shadow of loss and disobedience has fallen over the gift of the land, the people's renewed fidelity could still lead to the fulfillment of divine promise. Let's go to chapter 15. We'll read the first 4 verses. The lot for the tribe of the people of Judah, according to their families, reached southward to the boundary of Edom, to the wilderness of Zin at the farthest south. And their south boundary ran from the end of the Dead Sea, from the bay that faces southward. It goes out southward of the ascent of Akrabam, passes along to Zin, goes up south of Kadesh Barnea, along by Hezron up to Adar, making it turn to Karka, passes along to Asmon, goes out by the Wadi of Egypt and comes to its end at the sea. This shall be your south boundary. Owing to the author's southern perspective, Judah naturally comes first and has far more space devoted to it than any other tribe. This may have once been a static list of border points, but verbs descriptive of the border's course have turned it into a quasi-narrative. Goes, crosses, goes up, turns, goes down. This is not a definitive description of the border, but it goes on for a few more verses. We're going to skip to verse 13. But to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, Joshua gave a portion among the people of Judah according to the commandment of the Lord to Joshua. Kirthba, Raga, that is Hebron. Arab was the father of Anak, and Caleb drove out from there the 3 sons of Anak, Shanash, Anamah, and Talaman, the descendants of Anak. From there he went up against the inhabitants of Debar. Now the name Debar formerly was Kiriath Sephar. And Caleb said, whoever attacks Kiriath Sephar and takes it, to him I will give my daughter Ashesh as wife. Othniel, son of Kenaz, the brother of Caleb, took it, and he gave him his daughter Ashesh as wife. When she came to him, she urged him to ask her father for a field. As she dismounted from her donkey, Caleb said to her, "What do you wish?" She said to him, "Give me a present, since you have sent me to the land of Negeb. Give me springs of water as well." So Caleb gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. In Judges, the dispossessing of the 3 sons of Anak is expanded to become the deed for all of Judah. Back in chapter 10, verses 38 and 39, we read that Debar had already been conquered by Joshua. So again, some confusion, probably because we have collected several narratives from different sources in the book of Joshua. Verses 20 through 63 list names of people and towns within the boundaries of this newly granted territory of Judah. We're not going to read these, but go on to chapter 16, where the territory of Ephraim is defined. We're going to read chapter 16, the first 3 verses here. The allotment of the Josephites went from the Jordan by Jericho, east of the waters of Jericho, into the wilderness, going up from Jericho into the hill country to Bethel. Then going from Bethel to Luz, it passes along to Atroth, the territory of the Anakites. Then it goes down westward to the territory of the Japhites, as far as the territory of Lower Beth Horon, then to Gezer, and it ends at the sea. Again, the sons of Joseph, the Josephites, were Ephraim and Manasseh. Chapter 16 describes the land allotted to the tribe of Ephraim. Apparently, the border description here is hard to translate due to the disconnected list of its nature of original source and fragmentary manner in which it was utilized. We're going to skip over verses 5 through 9. Verse 10 reads, "They did not, however, drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer. So the Canaanites lived within Ephraim to this day, but have been made to do forced labor." In keeping with the historiographical agenda of the writers, whatever Canaanite population that is not destroyed or driven out becomes subjugated to the Israelites. It's questionable whether this corresponds to historical reality. We're going on to chapter 17, which is tied closely to chapter 16, Manasseh, who is also a son of Joseph. We will read verses 1 and 2. Then allotment was made to the tribe of Manasseh, for he was the firstborn of Joseph, to Machir, the firstborn of Manasseh, the father of Gilead, were allotted Gilead and Bashan, because he was a warrior, and allotments were made to the rest of the tribe of Manasseh by their families. Abizner, Hanalek, Ezrael, Shechem, Hefer, Shemada, these were the male descendants of Manasseh, son of Joseph, by their families. The clan of Machir is allotted the choice region of Gilead and Bashan, perhaps because he was the firstborn of Manasseh, but more likely because he was a man of war, suggesting that it was the military prowess of the clan that enabled it to take hold of this territory. We're going to skip down to verse 14, where we see a second example of the land grant narrative. The tribe of Joseph spoke to Joshua, saying, "Why have you given me but one lot and one portion of an inheritance, since we are a numerous people, whom all along the Lord has blessed?" And Joshua said to them, "If you are a numerous people, go up to the forest and clear ground there for yourselves in the land of the Pezerites and the Rephaim, since the hill country of Ephraim is too narrow for you." The tribe of Joseph said, "The hill country is not enough for us, yet all the Canaanites who live in that plain have chariots of iron, both those in Bethshan and its villages, and those in the valley of Jezreel." Then Joshua said to the house of Joseph, to Ephraim and to Manasseh, "You are indeed a numerous people and have great power. You shall not have one lot only, but the hill country shall be yours. For though it is a forest, you shall clear it and possess it to the farthest borders. For you shall drive out the Canaanites, though they have chariots of iron, and though they are strong." In this story, we see the essential themes again of the land grant request: the confrontation, the case and request, the land grant, and the summary. You can go back and read verses 3 through 5 of this same chapter and see another example, this time concerning a descendant of Manasseh who had only daughters, no sons, and the clan felt that they still had a claim on the land. We're going on to chapter 18, where the whole community of Israelites meet, and the other tribes are to be given their share of the land. Chapter 18, verses 1 through 8. Then the whole congregation of the Israelites assembled at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there. The land lay subdued before them. There remained among the Israelites 7 tribes whose inheritance had not yet been apportioned. So Joshua said to the Israelites, "How long will you be slack about going in and taking possession of the land that the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has given you? Provide 3 men from each tribe, and I will send them out that they may begin to go throughout the land, writing a description of it with a view to their inheritance. Then come back to me. They shall divide it into 7 portions, Judah continuing in its territory on the south, and the house of Joseph in their territory on the north. You shall write a description of the land in 7 divisions, and bring the description here to me, and I will cast lots for you, here before the Lord our God. The Levites had no portion among you, for the priesthood of the Lord is their heritage. Gad and Reuben and the half-tribe of Manasseh have received their inheritance beyond the Jordan eastward, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave them." So the men started on their way, and Joshua charged those who went to write the description of the land, saying, "Go throughout the land and write a description of it, and come back to me, and I will cast lots for you, here before the Lord in Shiloh." So this marks a shift from the role of encampment at Gilgal as the National Assembly place. Shiloh was the central sanctuary until its destruction by the Philistines sometime in the 11th century BCE. Placing the tent of meeting there would have confirmed its centrality. The construction of the tent of meeting, or the tabernacle, was described at the end of the book of Exodus. It was a shelter for the Ark of the Covenant. So moving the tent of meeting to Shiloh means that the ark had also been moved from Shechem. In 1 Samuel, the sons of the priest Eli take the ark with them into battle. Both sons are killed, and the Philistines capture the ark. The immediate issue in Joshua 18 is that 7 of the tribes have yet to have a territory assigned to them. So we drop down to read verses 11 and 12. The lot of the tribe of Benjamin, according to the families, came up, and on the territory allotted to it, fell between the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Joseph. On the north side, their boundary began at the Jordan. Then the boundary goes up to the slope of Jericho on the north, then up through the hill country westward, and it ends at the wilderness of Bethaven. The remaining 16 verses describe the rest of the territory of Benjamin, as well as listing the clans and families of Benjamin. It's interesting to note, and perhaps a bit surprising, that Jebusite, which is Jerusalem, is assigned to the tribe of Benjamin and not to Judah. But we go on to chapter 19 and more divisions of the land. In chapter 19, we'll read a few verses and skip a few verses, overall reading maybe a fourth of the chapter. We begin with the tribe of Simeon, verses 1 through 9. The second lot came out for Simeon. For the tribe of Simeon, according to its families, its inheritance lay within the inheritance of the tribe of Judah. It had for its inheritance Beersheba, Sheba, Bolada, Harzah Shaal, Bala, Ezem, Etolim, Bethel, Hormel, Ziklag, Beth Markaboth, Hazar Suth, Beth Leboth, and Sherhum, 13 towns with their villages. Ain, Rimia, and Esther, and Ashad, 4 towns with their villages, together with all the villages all around these towns as far as Baalath Beer, Ramah, and the Negeb. This was the inheritance of the tribe of Simeon according to its families. The inheritance of the tribe of Simeon formed part of the territory of Judah, because the portion of the tribe of Judah was too large for them. The tribe of Simeon obtained an inheritance within their inheritance. So unlike the other tribes, Simeon did not have a territory with clear-cut boundaries, but rather in enclaves within the territory of Judah. This situation is reflected in the curse Jacob pronounces on Simeon and Levi in Genesis 49. I will divide them in Jacob, disperse them in Israel. Let's go on to verse 10. The third lot came up for the tribe of Zebulun, according to its families. The boundary of its inheritance reached as far as Saradin, and then its boundary goes up westward and onto Maralah and touches Dabasheth, then the wadi that is near Joachim, etc., etc. Let's go on to verse 17. The fourth lot came out for Ishkar, for the tribe of Ishkar according to its families. Its territory included Jezreel, Shethluth, Shurim, etc. Go on to verse 24. The fifth lot came out for the tribe of Asher according to its families. Its boundary included Helkath, Hiel, Beton, Ashkeroth, Alamech, Amad, and Mishal. I'll go on to verse 32. The sixth lot came out for the tribe of Naphtali, for the tribe of Naphtali according to its families, and its boundaries ran from Heleph, from the oak of Inzanaman, and Anamek, and Jebeel, as far as Lakum, and it ended at the Jordan. Let's go on to verse 40. The seventh lot came out for the tribe of Dan according to its families. The territory of its inheritance included Zorah, Eshtal, etc. So this concludes the allocation of land to the 12 tribes. But we see in verse 49 that Joshua also has his own distribution. When they had finished distributing the several territories of the land as inheritances, the Israelites gave an inheritance among them to Joshua, son of Nun. By command of the Lord, they gave him the town that he had asked for, Timnath Serah, in the hill country of Ephraim. He rebuilt the town and settled in it. These are the inheritances that the priest Eleazar and Joshua, son of Nun, the heads of the families of the tribes of Israelites, distributed by lot at Shiloh before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. So they finished dividing the land. And thus we complete the distribution of the land to the 12 tribes. In session 6, we conclude the book of apportionments, and with it the second half of the book of Joshua. We will discuss chapters 20 through 24. We find some cities designated as cities of refuge and others as Levitical cities. We also hear Joshua's farewell address. I hope you can join us at our discussion on Monday evening. If you need to, send an email to online.classes@northgateumc.org to get the Zoom link. Otherwise, have a good week.